This past summer, we introduced the first ever Top 60 and 60 watch list. And now that the season is over, it's time to rank the best players in the state of Utah. It's the Top 60 and 60 ranking show. Live from Kenny J's Barbecue at the District in South Jordan. It's the Top 60 and 60 ranking show. Presented by Kenny J's Barbecue, where you can get 10% off your catering order at KennyJ'sBBQ.com. This is 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. All right, folks, it is our re-rank show as we will now count down the top 25 players in the state of Utah for the 2025 season. We've let everything kind of marinate a little bit for a couple months, and we spent some time going over everything, and now we've got our list of 25. Joining us now, Utah Insider, KSL.com, Josh Furlong, one of our favorite people on the planet. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing great. And then Mitch Harper, BYU Insider, KSLSports.com. How you doing?
Doing great, Scotty. We're here at Kenny J's. Cannot argue with that. The barbecue, so ready to roll, talk some football in February. I know we're in the thick of basketball, but to get a football fix, it's good to kind of revisit these top players from a memorable season in 2025.
So everybody submitted a poll, and then Lloyd averaged everything out. So here's the thing. In the old top 60, and I know both of you used to vote in that, the top 60 and 60, we would keep those ballots very close to the vest, and you guys can tell where you voted. I'm not going to make you do that, but it is we will be on the front lines. So myself, Josh, Mitch, Jake Hatch helped out on this as well. So just know that, you know what, if you got somebody to yell at us. We'll take it.
Yeah, we'll take it.
Mostly Jake Hatch, though. If you're
not
really
our
angry, it's Jake Hatch.
Throw it a yuck.
Yeah,
right there.
Exactly.
Send it his way.
So, yeah, but yeah, no, we'll start right here at number 2. Oh, by the way, before we get going, everything is available for you on video, KSLSports.com. Watch the video. Nate's done a tremendous job, and you can see the video of all these as well. And if you miss it, it'll be posted up on KSLSports.com so you can go back and revisit it. But coming in at number 25, let's go to Logan, inside linebacker John Miller, who I called every tackle of his this year. Ended up with, I believe, 118 tackles on the season. Tremendous player. And for those that get upset about the transfer portal and players getting poached from smaller schools to larger schools, there's also a little bit of it going the other way. John Miller started his career at Oregon State, really couldn't quite find the field early in Pac-12 play, and ended up playing his final year at Utah State and was just a tremendous force.
Great fit in Bronco Mendenhall's 3-4 scheme, too, and kind of reminded me a little bit, Scotty, of another former Oregon State linebacker in the past that Bronco coached at BYU, Awani Unga. Just a guy that racked up a ton of tackles, and two, the fact that inside backer, he gets 8 sacks. Huge production from John Miller, and I think, again, it speaks to your point about the portal, about guys that sometimes slip through the cracks, but they become great fits. And he took his time, too. I mean, it was second year at Utah State. He didn't really break through. He was kind of just a guy in year one, but year two was a big force and first team All Mount West.
And he's a guy that Bronco identified very quickly because I'll be honest, Bronco turned over that roster. There were a lot of people that left on their own, and then there were a lot of players that were advised to leave. But John Miller was one that he spotted very quickly and said, no, we can build this defense around him. The other player that they really built their defense around comes in at number 24, Noah Avenger. And I'm a huge fan of this guy because you get, when you do the play-by-play, or like you guys, when you're covered the team and you're in locker rooms and press conferences, you kind of see who the emotional backbone of a team is. The guys that are the leaders, not just on the field, but off the field. Noah was a New Mexico guy, came with Bronco, and everybody's kind of shell-shocked by what Bronco Mendenhall and that staff is making these guys go through. And Noah was the guy saying, hey, look, you know what? There's light at the end of the tunnel. We won at New Mexico with this guy. Imagine what we can do here. And tremendous safety. But here's, Ike Larson spent the first 6 games of the year suspended, and Utah State was just getting burnt on the corner. And so when Ike came back, they put him at safety and then moved Noah back out to corner. So he played both positions really well. And to me, I know John was your leading tackler, but I think the star of the defense last year was Noah.
Well, I think both of these players, though, they bought into the system, right? And I think that's what's tough with with Utah State, where they've had a little bit of a turnover in a lot of their roster. The fact that you could get players like that to consistently produce and do it at a high level under Bronco Mendenhall's first year there shows what it is. Obviously, Noah had experience with Bronco, so there was experience there. But I think you saw a very consistent force with Utah State where maybe they didn't get to the highest highs that they thought they could get to, but they definitely weren't at the lows. They were in competition for, a Mountain West title down to the late in the season, and two of these guys are key contributors to that defense. So I think it speaks to what they've built up there, and these two guys are perfect examples of how that has kind of been built up at Utah State.
Well, I think also it's a reminder, too, of that Bronco, still coaches defense at a very high level as Utah State gets ready to transition into the Pac-12, where the level of competition is going to go up, where I would look at the Pac-12 as going to be the league that always produces the highest group of 6 team into the college football playoff. You know that Bronco's going to field some excellent defenses and identify players that maybe don't get the 4-star, 5-star portal ranking, but they're going to be great fits into his scheme, and he can get the most out of their talents. I think that's kind of what speaks to it in year one, to get those early returns from a Miller and a Vinger. That speaks what the direction this program is going to be defensively.
And you're going to get the guys that feel like they've got a chip on their shoulder, whether they were at a P4 program and had to go down to Utah State. They're going to be angry about that, or guys that were overlooked in high school recruiting that are going to come in. They're going to have that chip on their shoulder. And those are Bronco dudes. I mean, Mitch, you're around Bronco enough to know that he feeds off that emotion because Bronco himself has a massive chip on his shoulder.
There's no doubt about that. I mean, Bronco, he's not for everyone, but for the guys that buy into his system and his culture, I mean, he and Bronco will be completely invested, fully invested into those players if you buy in to his scheme. And I just think that it was a great starting point for the program, getting to a bowl, and these two players on the defensive side really highlighted that defense for Utah State.
All right, let's move on. Number 23, as we rank the top 25 players in the state of Utah from the 2025 college football season. Josh, let's start with the first Ute off the board, J.J. Buchanan.
Yeah, J.J. was one of those guys that came in. There was a lot of optimism about who he could be. Was he a tight end? Was he a wide receiver? And it really didn't matter for what Utah had him do. But he became this efficient playmaker down the stretch, right? At the beginning, he was still trying to figure out who he was, trying to get into the system as a collegiate player. But near the end, he became this great asset for Devin Dampier to throw to, made some highlight catches in the bowl game that really kind of turned the table on who he was as a player. Finishes with 427 yards, just really kind of touching on his potential, right? And Michigan's obviously going to get a good player in what J.J. Buchanan can be. But I think we don't really know fully who he could be as an asset because he was just scratching the surface near the end of the season, coming into his own. But clearly a guy that has a knack for being able to get to the ball, being able to make tough plays, sideline catches, whatever it may be, and was a great asset for Utah. Just, they didn't get to see him enough.
How much, with the recent run of tight end success at Utah, you got to give Freddie Whittingham some success or some props on all of this.
Oh, yeah. Whether Freddie was responsible for, the actual coaching up of that or not, the fact that they can evaluate talent and be able to find guys that can come in and do it speaks to what they were able to do with Freddie Whittingham, with Kyle, the coaching, the recruiting staff. They were able to find tight ends pretty consistently, and JJ was one of those guys that they identified early. There was a big fight to get him in the recruiting, front, and he lived up to that expectation. I think if you can get 500 yards out of a freshman, I think that's a pretty successful season.
So at what point did you feel like in camp, like this guy was going to be special? Or did it bleed into the season where you're like, okay, this guy's going to be a problem for defenses?
I think there was definitely a lot of talk coming into fall camp about who he could be. It was more just, can he live up to that, right? Yeah. And I think there was also part of that, building the connection with Devin, trying to make sure that they could get on the same page, see where he fits in. And so I think that's kind of, you started to see it develop as the season went. There was no question that he was a guy that they could rely on. They just didn't know what they were going to have in that room. You didn't know if some other players were going to step up. And so when those other players didn't, JJ became a viable option and lived for it, right? Like when they threw him the ball, he actually made plays. He did a lot for them, and it was a great opportunity for him to be able to grow as a player.
All right, let's move on. Number 22. So our top three, John Miller, Noah Avinger, both from Utah State. Number 23, J.J. Buchanan. let's stay on the hill. Jackson Benny coming in at number 22. Josh, tremendous player as well.
Yeah, Jackson's one of those guys that he comes in as a walk-on. Nobody really expects him to do much. You heard little inklings about him kind of stepping up and being this guy that could be a solid playmaker, but we hadn't seen it. We saw it in spring, and we saw what he was able to do there, but spring's watered down. You don't know what you're going to get, and he's a guy that ran with it. They put him in positions on the defensive side of the ball where he was great in coverage. On the offensive side of the ball, he also became a playmaker that way. I mean, if you didn't have a illegal man downfield penalty against Texas Tech, he's gone for, a 70-yard touchdown. There's a lot to love about Jackson and who he can be, and I think we're still kind of just scratching the surface with him. I think he's going to be relied on heavily as a safety this year. He's played nickel, he's played corner. Safety is kind of where they see him. But I think with what he did, he came up clutch. I can't remember the game it was, but he came up clutch where he had a pass breakup that absolutely would have killed Utah if he didn't get it. They would have scored a touchdown, this opposing team, and I can't remember what it was. But he found ways to make plays wherever he was on the field. So, really solid player. The fact that he could do it as a walk-on and kind of earn his stripes kind of speaks to the level of the talent that he is.
Do you think the flirting on the offensive side continues with Kevin McGiven, or do you think those days are behind us?
I think you try it, right? I think you test it out in spring, see if it's something that you can utilize. But I don't know that Utah necessarily needs him to be that this year. They've got a little bit more talent in wideout, so he can be that guy, and I think, quite honestly, part of the reason they took Smith Snowden out of it a little bit more was because Jackson was emerging. So, if it works and that's somebody that they feel like they can utilize, yeah, keep going with it. But I don't know that they need to really rely on him the way that they did last year.
All right, let's move on. Number 21 in the top 25 re-rank as we take a look at the best players in the state of Utah playing college football last year. Our first Cougar on the board, Bruce Mitchell. Mitch, as Bruce goes 21.
Yeah, Bruce Mitchell, first team All Big 12 selection in his first year as the full-time starter at center. And, Mitchell, we saw him inserted into the lineup when Connor Pay went down in 2024, and he played in some big games, up on the hill against Utah. And he looked like he was going to be the next big thing at center, and he's lived up to that. Now, in fall camp, it was interesting. Him and Bear Bachmeyer, obviously that was a new relationship that was being formed on the heels of Jake Retzloff's exit. There was early struggles in camp where Bruce was having some issues with snaps. And even early in the season, he allowed a sack against Stanford. And you thought, man, is Bruce just not living up to the high expectations? But I really think he rounded into form in Big 12 play. I thought his best game was against Utah in Provo, and BYU's offensive front led by Bruce Mitchell. I think that was a big piece to BYU's success in that rivalry game to get that third consecutive win. But, Bruce Mitchell, it's interesting, too. He's going to go into 2026 running it back as the starting center. He's the elder statesman at BYU now. He signed back in 2019, was just a developmental guy that Elisa Tuiaki back in the day identified as kind of just a project, and he's really turned into a special football player. And again, I think it's still to BYU's core. They're always going to have, development as a piece to the program where you're going to find these hidden gem players locally, and then they become all-conference caliber players. Now, it's got to level up with the freshman talent that they can step in right away. But Bruce Mitchell kind of embodies that development culture that BYU's had under Kalani Sitake.
So I'll admit I'm a little biased because I worked with him a little bit at Utah State, got to know him and his family. But as soon as Kalani Sitake announced TJ Woods as the O-line coach, I'm like, okay, he's going to fix it. Because one thing about offensive line prior to TJ, they weren't aggressive. They didn't play violently. And you're like, where's that edge? And when TJ got the job, I told everybody, I'm like, okay, that edge is coming because TJ, there are certain guys that walk into a room and you know what position they coach. And TJ Woods walks in, you're like, that's an offensive line coach.
And I'm glad you bring that up because I think a lot of Cougar fans, for whatever reason, I don't know why, maybe it's just because, again, the logo he was coming from at the time, which was Georgia Southern, people thought, is this the hire? Like, I thought you're in the Big 12. You got to level up. But it was just a perfect fit and alignment with the rest of the coaching staff, with Aaron Roderick. And you're right, TJ Woods has really reinvented BYU's offensive line. And since he arrived, BYU has won 23 football games, and the key piece of that has been the offensive line led now by Bruce Mitchell, who's been a key piece these past 2 years.
All right, let's move on. Number 20. Back on the hill we go. Ryan Davis checking in at number 20. Josh?
Yeah, Ryan Davis is an interesting player because coming into the season, there was a lot of doubt on who he could be. You know, he's from New Mexico, and maybe there's a pejorative there, but nobody expected him to kind of be the guy. The reality is they didn't really understand the connection that he had with Devin Dampier and kind of what he was able to do. And he came up clutch for Utah in so many situations because Utah, quite honestly, just didn't have a major passing attack. And so when Davis became this guy that could just really do anything, I don't think he really dropped many passes at all. He was a guy that could be this reliable force where Devin was comfortable with him. He had a good consistency with him at New Mexico, and it just kind of snowballed in his time with Utah. You know, I think Utah fans by the end really wished that he was around for another season because of how successful he was. He was never your deep threat guy, right? Like, he was never a guy that you're going to go throw it 20 yards downfield. He was more of the intermediate short range, but he was so effective with it because he found open space, he got open, and then he made defenders pay because of it. And so, you know, he is a lot of credit for what Utah had in the passing a game, which was pretty minimal, quite honestly. But you know, you can't look at anybody but Ryan Davis as kind of the hero in that room of what they needed that year.
I think you bring up a really good point about his relationship with Devin Dampier. There was a safety blanket there as Devin was trying to figure things out, and he knew, like, okay, I've got number 9 there. Like, I'm going to be okay because I know what he does, and I can force feed him a little bit while I build up chemistry. And I think Devin Dampier, obviously a tremendous player, but Ryan Davis, I think, made that transition a lot easier for him.
Well, I think people forget, like, when you have somebody that you're comfortable with, it makes it so much easier as a quarterback. You've got to snap that ball in 3 seconds and get it off. And if you have somebody that you know where they can be and you know everything about them from the time that they were in practice squad together, it makes things so much easier. And so I think a lot of people downplayed that. And I think Ryan really took advantage of it. And Devin obviously had that security blanket. So,
all right, one more before we go to break. And this is number 19 and Smith Snowden. And we've already got tweets coming in from people like, hey, if they're at Michigan, they're disqualified. Hey, we're just ranking the top 25 from last year. Smith Snowden. Josh, would you have had him a little higher?
No, I mean, somewhere around there. I don't have my list right here with me, but I don't feel like Smith lived up to the expectations that he had the year prior. I think going into this season in the transfer portal, there was a lot of talk of him leaving, and that felt like a detrimental thing because he was just so good in coverage. He was one of their best assets there, and to lose him would just be another blow after a 5-7 season. Now this year, I don't know if it's a mixture of what Utah did to him in the sense that they had him at corner, they had him at nickel, then they had him on the offensive side of the ball. I don't know if it was just trying to do too much, and so he didn't really live up to the expectations that I think many had for him. Now that's not to say that he wasn't a solid player. He was absolutely effective for Utah in their defensive game. He didn't let much get past him. He had a high. I think it's the PFF grade where you say the NFL, like it wasn't that high for a lot of these teams that targeted him. So he was a valuable asset. I just think there was more that needed to be from him, and I think that was kind of where people were left, is saying, Smith could have done more. He just this year wasn't as good as maybe the year before.
I'm curious, Josh, do you think Benny should have been above Smith Snowden? Because when you look at kind of the impact, I mean, Benny sometimes maybe had the bigger maybe impact at times, and you thought almost like they're going to not skip a beat with him moving forward.
Well, I think you're right, honestly, and I think Jackson, with what he did on defense and offense, he deserved that, right? He was more of a prototypical size. He was great in coverage. He actually had better grades in PFF. He was better in coverage. Everything that he did just kind of eliminated some of what Smith was. And so I don't know that it was Smith necessarily being worse. It was more just Jackson stepping up. So I would have to agree with that Jackson probably should have been higher, but I don't know that it's that much of a difference, right? I think Jackson's going to be relied upon a ton this year, and then Smith's going to have to find his way at Michigan.
Smith is one of those names that I think almost every fan base in this state just has an opinion of. Cougar fans wanted him every day.
Yes, exactly.
It was always, is BYU going to get Smith Snowden? Now he goes off to Michigan, but I'm curious to see how he does there because I'm kind of with you. I still put him above Benny on my ranking. He was second team all Big 12, but the defensive back of the year from the Utah coaches in the Big 12 awards was Jackson Benny.
Yep.
But, I think that Smith Snowden's got, that first round NFL draft potential. That's what makes him so intriguing to me. Is like he's a future NFL guy, but I think Benny could be that eventually too.
Oh, there's no doubt. Our first 7 selections: John Miller at 25, Noah Abinger at 24, J.J. Buchanan at 23, Jackson Benny at 22, Bruce Mitchell at 21, Ryan Davis 20, and Smith Snowden at 19. We'll announce your next 5 selections coming up in our next segment. We are live here at Kenny J's Barbecue, and if you have not tried their burn ends, you get them today, you get them tomorrow. They're very limited, but my goodness, Kenny, you knocked this thing out of the park. And a little bit of trial and error there. I mean, this has been a labor of love getting those locked in.
Yeah, it was. They weren't the best when we first started. It was like it was just inconsistent, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Like one day they were good, and the next it was like, what did I do wrong? And then I'm like, anyway. So we locked it in. We locked it in after a few weeks.
How did? Is this fun for you still? I mean, to just kind of tweak things and try to figure out where things are at and how to make things better.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the people, really.
Yeah.
It's like I love smoking the meat, but I'm not like out talking all the time to people. That's what Mary does.
Yeah.
And but I like they come up to me and talk to me and say, so I love seeing people happy.
And I mean, that feedback is stuff that you want. I mean, you want to get that consistent feedback.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you didn't like. I don't get offended, but I try and fix it.
Yeah.
Like I'm already going to be redoing a sausage. We're looking at another sausage recipe, and just upping our game there.
I love it, man. Kenny J's Barbecue, such great barbecue. 10% off if you mention the Zone today, and they will kick you some savings, and you will have the best barbecue in the state of Utah. And frankly, it's not even close. Do you do your own sauces too?
Yeah, everything. The only thing we don't do here is the cornbread, and I only have cornbread because people say they want it.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I'm not gonna make cornbread and have gluten flying all over the kitchen, because I tell people all the time that unless it's actually macaroni and cheese or funeral potatoes, it's gluten free.
Funeral potatoes. How much fun has that been?
Good.
Yeah.
A lot.
I know. Yeah. I'm going to go get me some before it's all said and done.
On there, yeah.
All right, we're live here at Kenny J's Barbecue. Stop by in the district in South Jordan, right next to the old theater. Let's go. It's all right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Scott Garrard alongside Ute Insider Josh Furlong, Cougar Insider Mitch Harper. So come on down to Kenny J's. We'll give you 10% off. By the way, this segment brought to you by U of U Health, for you, for life. Go to uofuhealth.org. All right, we are now at number 18, and let's go back to Utah. Dallin Bentley, Josh coming in at number 18.
Yeah, I think Dallin Bentley turned into quite a great piece for Utah. He was that asset for Utah the year before. They just didn't have any quarterbacks that could throw it to him. I can't tell you how many times that I saw in film where he's like open in the flats and nobody sees him. And so I think the fact that he could have a quarterback that could see him and utilize him really showcases the talent he could be. The unfortunate part is, after years of injuries, he only got 1 year of it.
Yeah.
And so I think, we only scratched the surface of who he could be, but he was another one of those prototypical Utes on the tight end room that really just found production. He finished with 620 yards. He came up big in several situations for Utah. I can think of several where, they needed 20 yards to get out of a 3rd and long. And he got it for him. He was just we talked about Ryan Davis being the security blanket. He developed that a ton. Devin Dampier developed that a ton with Dallin Bentley, because he was just open. He was a big body, and he had a knack for being able to get to the ball. So, kudos to him. It's just unfortunate that you only got him for 1 year, really.
We used to joke about how Utah was where tight ends went to die, because, you had, the Murphy kid, and there were a lot of really good players, but were never utilized. And now all of a sudden, Utah becomes this tight end hotbed. Do you feel are you concerned that they'll be able to maintain that with the change of the coaching staff?
I think it'll change. I think, if they're talented pass catchers, I think they'll still be utilized, but I don't know that it's going to be the same that you had with Andy Ludwig or with Jason Beck. I think there's going to be a little bit more trying to get to the outsides, but they'd be crazy not to utilize the tight end. I mean, the NFL is heavily turning into an NFL or a tight end game. You'd be crazy not to include that still in the collegiate level. So you would know more with McGiven with his time at Utah State and how to utilize his tight ends. Granted, do they have the tight ends that Utah has? I don't know. So I'm fascinated to kind of see how they work them in. I know it's been less of a priority for them this year, but that's not to say that it can't be a priority if they have the right guys in the room.
Well, let's talk about one tight end that got away from Utah, Carson Ryan, checking in at number 17, Mitch, and his impact, not just as a pass catcher, but also as a blocker, was really key for BYU last year.
It's kind of like a run in fantasy football when you go on the tight end run. That's what it is here in our 60 and 60. Carson Ryan, 620 receiving yards. He had, 400 through his time at UCLA and Utah. And I remember, last December when BYU got a commitment from Carson Ryan out of the portal, Aaron Roderick. It was just moments before he spoke to the media. And he's like, we've already addressed our tight end position for 2025. And he was very confident about that. They knew that Carson Ryan would be a plug-and-play guy, even though the stats suggested that there wasn't much from the receiving game from that. But Carson Ryan fit in nicely, and BYU made the tight end position a big focus. Now, Ryan wasn't a big play guy. I mean, he had one catch against TCU that was, more than 40 yards, but he was just consistent. And then he had his best game in the Pop-Tarts Bowl where he went over 100 yards, but solid, consistent contributor. I thought it was interesting, too, in my conversations before his career wrapped up at BYU. He said that he just wished coming out of high school that he picked BYU to begin with, that he really regrets that he didn't spend his entire time at BYU because it just was a good fit for him. He kind of got, wined and dined the bright lights of UCLA, but that wasn't a fit. I think that's something that, I think a lot of players should always look at is just the fit is better than maybe the glitz, the glamour of the brand and the flashiness or the money. The fit was really good for Carson Ryan, and maybe he'll get a chance at the NFL. We'll see. He's not at the combine, but, maybe he can be an undrafted free agent and have a chance to maybe stick. But I thought it was a really impressive season, and he really revived the tight end position for BYU because the first years of the Big 12, the first two, it was non-existent. That position was, when you saw a tight end line up at BYU, it was just going to be a blocking, an extra blocker. That was it, whereas Ryan became a real threat in the receiving game for BYU.
So was it, and I know the answer to this is a combination of both, was it a commitment by the offensive coaching staff to make that more of a point of emphasis, or was it that Carson Ryan was just such a good fit that he emerged as the guy?
He emerged as the guy early. I mean, last spring, it was clear as day he's going to be one of the top targets, and Bearbach might even say when he arrived in the summer, like, he is my safety blanket is how he put it. But also Aaron Roderick, he wanted to make it a clear point and focus in the offense because I think that's one of the unique things about Kalani's program, and with Roderick, they kind of know the history of BYU offenses, and the tight end position is so kind of entrenched with the offensive side of the ball at BYU after quarterback. I'd say the most decorated position after QB on the offensive side is tight end in BYU's history. So for them to go multiple years where it's really a non-factor, they wanted to get that right. And I think he kind of gave a blueprint to a Walker Lyons now at USC who comes in and says, you can be that and then some, and maybe take it to a higher level. So I think it was an important year that BYU got that level of production from Carson Ryan.
So we got our, this will be our 10th guy off the board, coming in at number 16. Let's stay with BYU, Mitch. Evan Johnson.
Yeah, Evan Johnson, Shmev as they call him. You just got Shmev'd. He's emerged as a big-time cornerback for BYU. 5 interceptions, and this was a guy that BYU retained going into 2026. I really thought that there was a real argument that he could follow Jernal Guilford and Jay Hill to Michigan because Jernal Guilford found him as just a speedster, a guy that was really more of a track and field guy coming out of high school out of Monterey, California, 10'4", 100-meter guy, elite speed, but was kind of learning the game of football the past few years. And really, it wasn't until this past season where he really took off. The first 3 years, he was just development project, trying to teach him the game of football, but he really took off. And BYU needed him because they lost Jacob Robinson, who became one of the best cornerbacks in the Kalani Sitake era. I think Evan Johnson took it to a higher level, and I think that Johnson has a bright future ahead of him. He was impactful, too. He had a pick-6 against East Carolina. He had the game-clinching interception against Georgia Tech in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Johnson's really good, and, that was a big run-it-back announcement that BYU got from Evan Johnson because without him, That would have been a big hole to fill for BYU, but they get him back, and he was spectacular, better than I think anyone would have expected this year.
We talked about with Josh Fred Whittingham and his presence leaving the program. Gennaro Guilford leaving BYU. That'll be interesting to see how they're able to, because that's a big loss to that coach.
No question, and he's a guy that in many respects, he had all these connections in Southern California. When you need to go get a guy, Gennaro could just almost, speed dial anyone in Southern California. Now that's gone. Now they bring in DeMario Warren, who's got a lot of connections, and he mentored Gennaro Guilford in stretches of their coaching careers that have intersected down in Southern Utah. But, the cornerback, historically at BYU used to always be like, okay, that is a glaring issue. That position's like, BYU's never going to have good cornerbacks. They've kind of had more of the just speed guys in the past with great measurables, great size, and they've tried to develop them, and they hit. And, Evan Johnson is one of those guys that hit, and that's a testament to the development of Gennaro Guilford. So losing him is a big deal. I think that is something that will be very interesting to see how that takes place going forward. They do bring in Lewis Walker, who's going to be the cornerbacks coach now. He was once a defensive coordinator at Moorhead, and now from North Dakota State. So BYU, they feel good about their cornerback position. The kind of like a little bit of a body of work of success where there's actually producing NFL players too. I think that's promising for BYU, and Evan Johnson might be the next one.
Well, we talk about a nice surprise that BYU was able to hold on to Evan Johnson. A lot of people shocked when our 15th best player in the state of Utah decided to come back for another year. Bird Ficklin, University of Utah. Bird and Devin back again for the University of Utah. But, Josh, this young man, the sky's the limit on what he can do.
Yeah, this is one of those players where when you see him get on the field, he just has it.
Yeah.
Right? I think we've all been around those types of players where it's just easy to kind of identify that they have talent. The beauty with Bird is that he was put in different roles that didn't make him adversarial to Devin Dampier, right? And so the two of them could work really well together and not feel like one is going to take over the other. Now, Bird is definitely capable and more than he has the ability to be able to go somewhere else and be the guy, but they've found a great connection where Devin can still be your starting quarterback, but Bird can still get his own. You saw that in several early games for Utah where they were just blowing teams out. He could come in there, be the fourth quarter quarterback, and really, every single time that he got into the game, he threw a touchdown. So there was something about him that people were really optimistic about. And then midway through the season, suddenly he just emerges as this like rushing giant where he's just escaping. I think it was Baylor where he just decided to destroy them on his own and became this great asset for Utah. And so they started utilizing him more in being able to help in what Devin did. They put both quarterbacks on the field at the same time, which you can argue whether that's valid or not. But there was an opportunity where these two could be great assets together, and Bird definitely lived up to it. So I think it's a great asset for Utah to be able to have him back.
You asked, we're not quite sure how Kevin McGivern's going to work tight ends in. One thing I do know is Kevin McGivern's going to have a ball.
Oh, yeah.
Because he loves, pre-snap motions. He loves finding mismatches. He loves, putting guys in positions that you're not expecting. One thing I think obviously there's a financial aspect to this, but I think Bird Ficklin spent a little bit of time with Kevin McGivern. He's like, hey, this is a guy I want to hitch my wagon to because he can do some things.
And Bird has a strong arm. Like it's way better than Devin. Devin is a great intermediate guy, right? Like you can get him anything there. He can still make the deep passes, but if you get Bird in there and he can make those deep throws, maybe you can find a way to utilize both players in there where if the deep shot is available, Bird can take the shot. If the intermediate's there, Devin's the guy. I don't know how you utilize that and what Kevin McGivern will do, but I think you've got so much versatility, whether it be in the passing game or the running game with these two quarterbacks. And Bird 100% deserves all the credit because he's been able to live it up. The lights aren't too bright for him, but at the same time, he's this humble kid who just really wants to go about doing his work and having fun doing it.
All right, one more selection before we go to break. And again, another Utah member of that offense, Wayshawn Parker. Josh coming in at number 14.
We're just going to continue with all these Utah players.
I know, right? Yeah.
Wayshawn Parker, this was a guy that there was so much excitement about coming into the program, as an up-and-coming young player from Washington State who really kind of fit the mold of what Utah wanted in a running back. And, he had goals of getting to 1,000 yards, 1,500 yards was his bigger goal, and just barely misses it with 981 yards. but he's a guy that really kind of picked up at the end of the season. Kyle Whittingham had a bet with him where if he could rush for 100 yards each game, he could wear some pink sneakers that would help his niece identify him on the field. And it really motivated him to a point where he really wanted to just get 100 yards every single game. Not that he needed that motivation, but I think it was just kind of a little telltale that helped him to kind of focus on some things as a younger player. And he really took off at the end of the season. I think early on, he had a fumble in that Texas Tech game that really kind of hampered him. And Kyle, anybody that's been around Kyle forever knows that if you fumble or if you turn over the ball, you're going to be on his bad list for a minute. That kind of, I think, set him back a bit. He was splitting carries with N'Kerry Rogers. And so it took him a minute to emerge at Utah, but once he did, you can see the potential there. And I think the fact that he can come back this year as the guy means a lot for Utah and for him personally.
I think one of the reasons why Utah made a move at offensive coordinator, I haven't gone through all of Kyle's career, but outside of COVID, the 2024 season, they ran for just 1,500 yards on the season, which is so un-Utah-like. And, of course, last year, new offensive coordinator, you retool the roster a little bit, and they're at 3,400 yards rushing, back to where they usually are. More often than not, they're well over 3,000 yards rushing.
Well, and they'll still do that. I mean, Kevin McGivern, as you know, is very heavy on the pass, but that's not to mean that he just completely lets it go, right?
Not at all.
And I think when you have an asset like Wayshawn Parker and some of the other guys that they're bringing in, now you have a full complement of players where you, in theory, have a better receiving room. Now you can actually have a good running attack. Not that they didn't have a good running attack, but it doesn't have to be the sole focus of what this Utah team can be. So I think Wayshawn, in some respects, can even get more yards because of that, because the focus isn't going to be solely on him all the time because there's so many more assets around him.
All right, that is Josh Furlong. Mitch Harper covering BYU. Josh does a tremendous job at KSL.com. Of course, you got some great insight from Mitch Harper. You followed him for years. He's at KSLSports.com. We are live here at Kenny J's Barbecue. Come by, get 10% off your barbecue. Do yourself a favor and try these brisket burn ends, as good as anything you'll ever try. We'll talk to our guy Kenny coming up in our next segment, but this is your top 25 players in the state of Utah, the Re-Rank Show. Josh Furlong and Mitch Harper. Nobody covers the Utes and Cougars better than these guys, and appreciate both of them coming down here. Now, we did bribe them a little bit with burn ends, and
it worked.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
fantastic. The bribery was fantastic.
By the way,
Great move.
if you're watching on video, those are your burn ends right there. That is worth that is candy right there.
Literally.
You cannot beat that. All right, let's move on. We got our short segment here, so we got two players. Let's start with one of my favorite players over the last couple of years, Isaiah Glasker from BYU. Mitch, coming in at 13.
He's an absolute stud, but I'm not gonna lie, Scotty. I think this is a little bit high for Glasker this year. My personal rankings, I actually had him at 21. It's because I think Glasker took a little bit of a step back. There was such a high bar for what he did his sophomore season, where he was the leader in tackles for loss in the Big 12. This year, though, he dealt with injuries. He rolled the ankle against Colorado, injured his finger against Cincinnati. Still, I think that's a reason why he's coming back in 2026, because had he replicated his production in 24, he's probably off to the NFL and probably a day two guy. So, benefits BYU that maybe there was a little bit of a dip. And, BYU had to invest in him to retain him and get him back for the 2026 season. But when he is healthy, his impact is outstanding. And I always think back to, there were so many fall camps where he was showing all these signs of becoming an elite player. And I remember there were some former players that even told me, this guy's going to be the next Calvin Noy. And I thought, man, he's good, but let's pump the brakes here a little bit. But Glasker, when he's healthy and he's at his best, he's one of the best linebackers in the Big 12, and that's going to be the expectation for him next year. This past season, only 36 tackles, which still impactful, but I think there's a higher bar for what he can become next season, and that's what he's going to aspire to do, kind of replicate what he did his sophomore year and do it at an even higher level in 26. But he's been a key piece for BYU's really good defenses the past 2 years.
A couple of years ago, when BYU had Max Tooley, they had A.J. Bong-Pachon, and I'm like, and you lose all those linebackers, and I'm thinking they're going to be in trouble. And the fact that they take another step in, not just they match that level, they go way higher with Glasker and Kelly, who, by the way, we'll announce his name a little bit later. You can guarantee that. But I think what they've done with their linebackers over the last 2 years has been fantastic.
Yeah, they've been really good. And Glasgow, he's taken his time too. Once was a wide receiver in high school, then safety, then moves up in the box. He's really found his stride at that position, and now his cousin's going to be joining the program. So it's a family connection at BYU, even though he told me he grew up a Utah fan, which was kind of fun to hear that because I didn't really realize that he grew up a Utah fan. But Glasker's a heck of a player, and I think he's got NFL in his future, but he's got to stay healthy because that's kind of what limited him from being at his best throughout the 2025 season.
Well, Josh, let's talk about a guy that you and I covered extensively, coming in at number 12, Bryson Barnes, quarterback at Utah State. Of course, started at Utah and got appearances in back-to-back Rose Bowls with unfortunate injuries to starting quarterbacks. But Bryson Barnes was a perfect fit at the right time, at the right place at Utah State, especially last year with Bronco Mendenhall. He was a Bronco guy, and you met Bryson, and you knew immediately, like, this guy's going to connect with Bronco, and they did. And honestly, he would have been, if Utah State just had a mediocre offensive line, he would have been your Mountain West Conference Player of the Year. I have no doubt in that whatsoever. They win 2 or 3 more games because what Bryson did last year with the pressure that he was under and the amount of sacks, he took 37 sacks last year. And that doesn't count the hits after throws, too, that are just as damaging. He was an absolute warrior and one of the favorite players to cover last year, period.
Well, that's the thing about him is he's everything for your team that you need him to be, right? He's the ultimate grit player. He's the ultimate hard worker. He will do everything it takes to win. And I love that his last season he's paired with Bronco, because the year before
that was a mess.
It was a mess.
Yeah.
But with Bronco, the two of them just seemed to be on the exact same page. They knew exactly what they needed to be, and he absolutely embodied it. And then you throw in Kevin McGibbon. We're talking about him a ton right now.
Yeah.
And it was just this perfect storm of the type of player that he can be. Bryson was always a talented quarterback. That was seen in the Rose Bowl when the first time you got to see him at Utah. He was a great asset at Utah with what he needed to do. There was a disconnect there, and so the fact that he was able to get that with Bronco Mendenhall, I love it. The fact that he could go out that way is like the perfect story, because I think he's absolutely deserving of that, to be able to come from such a low-level school in the state, not because of it's a low class, it's just there's not a lot of people, and he comes out there and he just dominates, and he shows kind of who he is as a player, and I love it. I think it's a great opportunity.
And he leads Utah State, too, to a bowl game with a schedule that had A&M, a playoff team, Vanderbilt knocking on the door of the playoff. New Mexico was really good. I mean, Scotty, but like Boise State, that was a tough schedule, and he gets them to a postseason. I think it's a great pull. That I think he was better than Colin Drea from UNLV, from Mountain West Offensive Player there. I think he should have won the award, but like you said, the offensive line kind of let him down a little bit in that regard.
Just the amount of hits he took this year, there's not a lot of quarterbacks that would have been able to play all games with the amount of contact that he took. All right, we'll take a break, come back, and get to your top 11 players in the state of Utah. Kenny's hanging out with us. We're live at Kenny J's Barbecue in the district in South Jordan. And if you haven't heard Kenny's story, life was pretty good for you. You're running banks, you're having a good time, and then you think, you know what? I want to just drop all of it and start my own barbecue joint. And, man, I love seeing people come here, try your barbecue, because it's just fantastic.
Yeah, it's been a crazy almost year. Wouldn't change a thing. Was kind of tired of working for other people and doing stuff for them and helping them get what they want, and so focus on ourselves and what we love doing. And so,
did you? What kind of work went into putting those smokers in the back and building those out?
Well, so we did it a little bit backwards because the smokers didn't get done in time. But yeah, it was forklifts and like just moving them an inch at a time, especially the big one, the big rotisserie. So yeah, next time, which it's big news. We're looking for the next year, looking to do another location. So
let's go.
Yeah, probably a year out or so. We're looking around and trying to find a property.
You need another guy that comes in at 2 a.m. because I'm your guy. Sign me up.
Okay. You're gonna hands them.
Yeah. Well, no. I still need the day job, but
Okay.
this can be my
Yeah.
my side hustle. a
Sure.
little bit.
Come
Let's
on.
go.
Yeah. let's
Because
do it.
this barbecue is just incredible. If you haven't tried it, you need to get down here. You're getting 10% off if you mention the Zone. They got the burn ends today and tomorrow, correct?
Yep. Fridays and Saturdays every week.
And one thing that we don't talk a lot about, because we're all about the brisket and the burn ends and the pulled pork, but I'm telling you, the turkey is
yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah, that's one of our top sellers, actually.
It's so good. Come by, check it all out. It's Kenny J's Barbecue in the district in South Jordan. This is 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Hour number 3 of the program, hour number 2 of the re-rank special. Scott Garrard alongside Josh Furlong, your Ute Insider, KSL.com, and from KSLSports.com, Mitch Harper, who's been covering BYU forever, kind enough to hang out with us. All right, so let's get right to it. In fact, let me reset the previous list. Coming in at 25, John Miller, Noah Avenger from Utah State, J.J. Buchanan at 23, Jackson Benny, 22, Bruce Mitchell, 21, Ryan Davis, 20, Smith Snowden at 19, Dallin Bentley at 18, Carson Ryan, 17, Evan Johnson at 16. Coming in at 15 was Bird Ficklin, Wayshawn Parker at 14, Isaiah Glasker, number 13, and Bryson Barnes at number 12. If you want to see the full list, Maddie will have it posted at the end of the show up at KSLSports.com. Another interesting player that's got ties now to multiple schools here in the state, Braden Pagan, was a great wide receiver last year at Utah State with Bryson Barnes, and now he makes his way with his offensive coordinator to come down to Utah. And I'm again a little partial because I like Braden a lot, and I love calling a lot of his stuff. He's not your burner, but he does fit that Ryan Davis kind of mold that they had last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is how Utah's going to utilize him. They're going to try to utilize him in kind of maybe the wide receiver one, but in a different way than most wide receiver ones are used. But, I think Utah saw the success that he had at Utah State, was a valuable asset for Bryson Barnes. Obviously lived in the Kevin McGiven offense and did really, really well. And if Utah can get half of that production, they want more than that, obviously. But if they can get that production out of him, they're in a good spot. And I think, Pagan has an opportunity to continue to cement himself in maybe the future, right? Like, you would know best if he has an NFL career. But I think the fact that you can have a guy that could, approach 1,000 yards, if he could do that for Utah, he would be their first one since, I believe, Drez Anderson.
Yeah, I know, crazy.
Which is wild. I mean, I know Darren Carrington was, like a few yards off, but if he can get anywhere near that, I mean, I think that's a huge win for Utah and what they're able to do, because it certainly was certainly successful at Utah State.
Did a really good job getting off press coverage. He's got, you make your joke however you want here. He's got sneaky athleticism. He's got sneaky speed.
We know what you're saying.
Yeah, he's not gonna burn it up. But
he's Ryan Davis.
He's Ryan Davis. I mean, that's really. I mean, it's spot on. But I'm fired up to see what he does. Kevin McGiven and that offense, and I think he meshes very well with Devin Dampier and that offense. All right, coming in at number 10, let's go back to BYU. Mitch Tanner Wall checking in at 10.
Former walk-on, became a first-team All-Big 12 safety, and it's quite the story. I mean, he was such a good athlete out of high school, and his dream was to always play at BYU, and kind of just the perfect program guy. And he was impactful, and I thought he was excellent. 71 tackles, had a pick 6, but he always made key plays, and he knew the defense inside and out. He had the trust of Jay Hill, which I think was significant considering Jay Hill coached the safeties. He played the position. He had a high bar for what he wanted from the safety spot, and Tanner Wall exceeded that. I thought he was outstanding, and I'm curious to see if he becomes maybe an undrafted free agent. I don't know if he'll be a draft pick, but I think he gets an opportunity because he did so much. He played on special teams. He did a lot of different things for this BYU team, and he was always that guy. We know in this line of work there's always some guys that when it's a loss, you probably know who's going to hit the mic and take the one for the team, and that was Tanner Wall for BYU. Whenever there was adversity, he'd face the music and speak for the team. Like he just kind of embodies what BYU wants its football players to kind of represent, and that's Tanner Wall, and he was a really good player. He's going to be tough to replace. I mean, BYU's got some good talent returning, and we'll talk about one of them coming up, but Tanner Wall was very good. He was consistent for the last 3 years. In the transition to the Big 12, Tanner Wall was a mainstay.
Well, and there's no doubt what the There are certain guys that have that impact on the locker room. You can tell Tanner Wall was certainly that guy. Let's move to number 9, wide receiver for BYU, Chase Roberts. A good year for Chase. Fired up to see what his future holds as well.
Chase was a really good player for BYU, and I'll admit I think last season was a little bit of a step back compared to 2024. He had a lot of attention thrown his way. I mean, he was coming back from a shoulder injury that he suffered in the Alamo Bowl. Maybe that put him a little bit behind. But Chase Roberts, impactful, and he was steady for the past 4 years for BYU. I think that he was not when you think of like a top receiver, some of the greats at BYU, like a Kali or a Puka Nacua, he's not a game changer, but man, he was reliable. You could always count on him, and he had some big catches for BYU. That touchdown against Utah where he invented a new hand gesture that they called the Super Y. Chase Roberts was really good, and he opened it up for the Carson Ryans and Parker Kingston's too. I know Parker Kingston no longer with the program, but Parker Kingston in large part became BYU's number 1 receiver in terms of receiving yards because I think of a lot of the attention given to Chase Roberts. So that can't be undersold, and he dealt with injuries too late in the season. He had the hamstring that he suffered against Cincinnati, so it was kind of an up and down year a little bit, but man, he was impactful, and when he was on, he was steady.
Well, and I think he may be a victim of our projections for him,
and I think that's a good point.
And so I don't want that to limit what he did last year. I mean, he had 800 yards receiving and 54 catches, led the team in receiving touchdowns with 6. Just a really, really great player. And sometimes if a player doesn't live up to the expectations we set for them, then we knock him down a little bit. But you mentioned the injuries. A guy that's been a steadying force for BYU this year, or last year.
Yeah, he was good. And I think, too, that he will be tough to replace because looking forward, BYU does not have anyone that you can confidently say is a number 1 or even a number 2 or maybe even a number 3. You knew when Chase Roberts was on the field, you're going to get some level of production. And that's absent now from BYU's offense going forward. And, he again kind of looking ahead with the NFL. He went through the East-West Shrine game. I don't know if he's a draft pick. Like, I always think of if Puka Nacua, how elite he was. We knew all locally how good he was out of high school. If that's a 5th rounder, I think Chase is probably like a 7th-round guy, undrafted free agent, but I think like Tanner Wall, he'll be someone they'll find a way to stick onto a roster and uplift the locker room because that's what he was for BYU.
Yeah, and I do think he's the kind of guy that probably doesn't get drafted, but then all of a sudden we'll see some reports from some camp somewhere like, hey, this guy's turning some heads.
Yeah.
This guy's making it happen. All right, back-to-back BYU players, Mr. Satawala coming in at number 8.
Satawala has the potential, Falatau, to be, I think, an all-timer at BYU in terms of the safety position. 2nd-team All-American by the Football Writers Association of America. He took off after that Arizona game when Raider DeMooney went down with an injury. That was the opening that created a full-time starter spot for Falatau. It was always noteworthy how early in the season it was, he was the 3rd guy, and he was kind of taking over some snaps for Tanner Wall or Raider DeMooney. BYU was always trying to find ways to get Falatau on. They were kind of in this tricky spot where it was like, we want to respect the upperclassmen and Wall and DeMooney, but we know this Satawala guy has a higher ceiling, and he can be big time. And when DeMooney, which was unfortunate at the time, but it's like it created the opening for Satawala to take off, and he was awesome for BYU. He had a pick 6 that was kind of a game clincher against Iowa State. I thought that was one of his great moments of the season. A hard hitter. He led the team in tackles, 84 tackles for BYU, forced fumbles, sack, pass deflections. He could do it all. And big expectations. He was the guy that I think naturally all of us looked and said, okay, because of the level of commitment that was put into the resources to get him in the recruitment. It was a BYU-Utah battle. You just thought, okay, he's going to follow Jay Hill to Michigan, but BYU retained him, and he announced it moments after Jay Hill was officially announced to Michigan. That was huge for BYU and spoke to Kalani's program that Falatau was invested into this program, but huge expectations. I think he could go down, potentially as one of the all-timers. If his career continues to progress, as we saw this year, he's going to be a really good one for BYU in the future.
Well, another guy that we may talk about is an all-timer, Caleb Lomu at the University of Utah, checking in at number 7. Most draft projections have him as a first-round pick, as well as Spencer Fano, who we'll talk about later as well. But, Josh, I want to get your thoughts on what he meant to that team, and both he and Spencer anchoring that offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, coming into the season, there was a lot of expectations placed on both of them. And like you said, we'll talk about Spencer a little bit more. But Caleb was the guy that many saw maybe isn't as refined right now, but he has a higher potential in the NFL, which says a ton about who he can be and his longevity in the sport. But the thing is, both of these guys lived it up at Utah, right? They knew the expectations. They knew it was going to come. You knew as a left tackle that you're going to get a ton of pressure. You're going to get the best of whatever team has for you. And he held firm. He didn't allow a sack. I think he allowed maybe like 2 hurries the entire season. I mean, this is a guy that was incredibly efficient in one of the most pivotal positions on the offensive line and helped anchor what Utah needed for them, especially for Devin Dampier, especially for that run game. You know, he's just a guy that's that prototypical offensive line that's no nonsense, just kind of eats the way that he needs to and does what he needs to do and doesn't worry about anything else. And it was completely efficient for Utah. The fact that you had both of these guys anchoring both sides of the line really helped Utah with what they were able to do.
Jim Harding has been such a staple at Utah for so many years as bringing so many offensive line, obviously tutoring them, coaching them up, and getting them into the NFL. Jordan Gross certainly has the resume as a player. I do think there's some people out there that might be a bit concerned about his ability to coach at the Big 12 level, but a familiar face, Gerke's back to try to help out a little bit there as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a natural, you're going to have to move up to the next level, right? Coaching high school is completely different than coaching at the collegiate level. But I think the way that he was able to coach up a 5-star offensive tackle shows that he's got at least some understanding of what it takes. Clearly he played it, and he played it at an efficient level. Everybody talks about how incredible he is and smart as he is. So there's going to be a learning curve. And I think it's going to take some time, but I don't think that Utah's necessarily going to take a huge step back because of his brilliance in just understanding the game. That it'll help. They've got talent. They've got guys that are coming back that, they've had some success with. But yeah, there's going to be a learning curve. It's not going to be Jim Harding back there. But I think if there's anybody that you can trust, Jordan Gross is at least a guy that you can at least throw some, be happy with when it's all said and done.
All right. We've got the top 6 coming up right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. We got a couple quarterbacks. We got a linebacker. There's a lot of positions left up for grabs here as we announce the top 6 football players from last year's college football season. As I tell you what, we're down here at Kenny J's Best Barbecue. You don't need a ranking here. It just starts with 1. It's Kenny J's Barbecue here in the state of Utah. And, you can advertise like crazy, and we appreciate you being a part of the zone. But ultimately, it's word of mouth. And if people have a bad experience, then they're done. They're not coming back. But you've got some regulars because they know what they're going to get here time and time and time again.
Yeah, I had a customer in the other night, and he said, I usually, when I don't recognize someone, I'll ask them, hey, how did you hear about us, right? So it's kind of like I'm trying not to do it to everybody. But this guy just kind of caught my eye, and I said, how'd you hear about us? And he said, I found you a month ago. He says, I'm from Harriman. And he goes, I've been in here 9 times.
9 times.
9 times.
That is awesome.
In a month. And I'm just like, hey, slow down a little bit so you don't get sick.
Yeah. But, I mean, that's the kind of thing, the loyalty, because when you always want to have your barbecue joint. Josh and I were talking about barbecue and how much we love it. And you just want to have that place, your place. And we were talking to a lovely couple from Blanding who came up here, and his wife really doesn't like barbecue, but she loves Kenny J's Barbecue. He's got family that doesn't necessarily like barbecue, but this is the barbecue they like because they taste the quality here.
Yeah, I think he said they don't want to. It's hard to spend a lot of money and then just not have quality. And if you feel like you didn't have quality, just come talk to me and we'll we'll figure out a way to make it right.
Well, and that's the thing. I know that not a lot of people can take you up on that offer because everybody is enjoying what they have here.
Yeah.
Quality meats. You cook it the right way. You use the post oak. You've got that Central Texas kind of feel to it. There's a lot of different styles, but
Yeah.
I think most people that love barbecue love that Central Texas, and you've honed it in with the post oak and everything else.
Yeah, I mean they do their own marketing, right? I mean, people vacation to Central Texas just to eat barbecue, to go all over Central Texas and kind of out the outskirts of that to eat at all the top 50 Texas monthly barbecue joints, and like they literally have a book and they're going through it. Okay, this is, it's crazy, and it's something that we want to bring here, where people aren't going to come vacation here just to go to Kenny J's, but that you get the same kind of experience, right?
But they're coming
from a feel
Yeah.
of the restaurant, from the food, just that type of experience.
Kenny J's Barbecue. It's the district in South Jordan. Come on by and try this barbecue. It's absolutely incredible. If you're not one of the people that have been here 9 times and you're going to try it for the first time, well, you're going to have an experience. And plus, we'll even give you 10% off if you mention the zone. It's 10% off this Kenny J's Barbecue. It's absolutely incredible, folks. And you got the burn ends today and tomorrow. And these are as good a burn ends as you'll have anywhere in the world, let alone the state of Utah. This is 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Gentlemen, I've got to catch a flight to lovely Reno, Nevada.
Lovely.
I'm very excited for this. Utah State, Nevada coming up tomorrow in basketball. So Jake Hatch is here. He'll take over as you got the fun stuff. This is the one that everybody, I'm sure, will agree on. You won't get any bad reaction whatsoever. Top 6 players being announced coming up next. 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Scotty G is off to Reno, Nevada. I'm Jake Hatch, filling in for the final stanza of the show today alongside Josh Furlong and Mitch Harper. Gentlemen, thanks for having me along for the ride for the final half hour.
It's good to always talk football with you, Jake. We do it all the time at the student-athlete building.
We've also been blaming you this whole time, so it's finally good to have you here.
I fully expected that. I'm not going to lie. There's a fun story, and Lloyd knows this story, about a former producer of ours that made one of the biggest faux pas in 60 and 60 history that we've never let him live down, even though he no longer works with us. Let's just put it that way. So always fun. I want to remind you guys that we are brought to you by our friends over at U of U Health. At University of Utah Health, hope is in our DNA. Learn more at uofuhealth.org. All right. So we are down to the final 6 of the top 25 rankings of the 60 and 60 here, gentlemen. And we're going to start to court some controversy right about
Let's go.
It's that Joker gif, and here we go.
Exactly.
Let's set it off right now.
So at number 6, we are diving into the quarterback debate here. And at number 6, Devin Dampier. Well, Mr. Josh,
All right, let's do this.
down QB1 up on the hill for us.
So I personally had Devin higher, and it's not because I cover the U, though that does give me a different, interesting perspective.
Fair.
But I think with what Devin did for this Utah team based off of the year prior, he was everything for that team, right? You go from 5-7, anybody around the program realizes like how down and in the dumps everybody was. There was like literally no hope going into the next season because everybody thought that it was going to be another 5-7 season. Did Kyle have what it took to get Utah to that level again? Devin completely changed that rhetoric instantly, whether it was from his smile with what he did with the locker room and kind of the culture that he brought there, completely changed the game. Now, when you're looking at him from the stats, yeah, he's probably not going to be the highest here, right? Like Bear Bachmeier is going to be higher now. We can say that.
Yeah.
He has better stats than like Devin, or Bear has better stats than Devin. But as a whole, I think with the complete picture, Devin was a complete game changer for this Utah team to get them to an 11-2 season. You get him another season. It just kind of gives you that trajectory that Utah's hoping. You kind of get that bridge, especially for Morgan Scalley as he's coming in, and he becomes just this great kind of figure where it's not forced, right? Like it's something that feels so natural and it makes it so easy, and he can run the ball, he can pass the ball. And quite honestly, we didn't really get to see a lot of his level because he was injured all season. They kept it under wraps that he needed surgery.
It was sports hernia.
A sports hernia, yes. So they kept it under wraps that he had a sports hernia that lingered him all year. He had an ankle injury that he lingered with all year. like, injuries happen in football, so it's not like we're going to sit here and try to downplay everything. But the fact that he was able to do what he did with those types of injuries kind of shows the level of player that he can be. He was more efficient than what he was at New Mexico, which was his biggest knock, is like, oh, can he do that in the Big 12? And he did it. So, like, whether you have him at 6, whether you have him wherever, I don't think it really matters ultimately, because I think what he does for the program changed everything for Utah, and that gave them hope.
So, Mitch, real quick on Dampier, I use the term heart and soul in terms of what Dampier meant for the Utah football program, because to what you're talking about, Josh, and your thought on this, Mitch, is everything he did, he really kind of just embodied everything Utah was a season ago.
Definitely. And, I think that Devin Dampier really, to Josh's point, gives a completely different outlook of what Utah is viewed offensively, because that first year in the Big 12, Utah, it was bleak. I mean, if Utah had scored just like 14 points in some games, they win probably an extra 2 games that season and go to the postseason. Devin Dampier was really good. I do think the injuries, though, you saw it like in that, I remember that BYU game, the second half, and Whittingham at the time kind of downplayed it, but it was clear as day that Dampier wasn't healthy. I think that kind of limited him, obviously, this season. I still think there's some questions, though, about a little bit of the accuracy.
Yep.
Late in the season, you get down to like 60%. If he can level that thing up, I mean, there's no reason that, these 2 quarterbacks in the state can't be the best quarterbacks in the Big 12. I think Dampier is dynamic. I was really impressed, though, with his 5-to-1 TD to INT ratio, because I really thought that was going to be a mixed bag. I honestly thought going into the year, you're going to have some moments where he's going to throw some picks, but, man, he's going to be dynamic. He really didn't have that issue. I am curious, though, in 2026, how he fares without elite tackles, though. That'll be something I'm kind of curious to see how that gets answered this year, but yeah, I think Dampier, though, was excellent. Everything that Utah could have wanted and more.
Well, and I think part of that, he has happy feet at times, especially late in the season. He wasn't setting his feet. He was kind of getting a little too antsy in the pocket, trying to maybe do too much. And so that needs to be cleaned up. But I think to that point, you're not going to have your tackles, plus you're not going to have your security blanket of Ryan Davis. You're going to have to find some new guys to throw to. And luckily, he has a lot of these guys that are coming back, plus he's adding new ones, where if they can get that to gel, maybe he can take that next step. But you're not wrong. Like, there was times where, in that Kansas game, we got an interesting view because we were at the end zone view instead of where we're usually at like a 50-yard-ish line. And it was crazy to kind of watch him go through his progressions. And it was just kind of so different from the beginning of the season, where he was a little bit more calm and collective, where in this, he was like scrambling and he wasn't setting his feet and he was just really kind of out of sync. It worked. He found ways to do it. But I think for him to take that next level, that's where he needs to be. Is he needs to find some consistency, some rhythm there. You have to hope that Kevin McGivern and his quarterback coach is going to kind of settle him in and allow him to kind of continue to develop as a player.
All right, up next, number 5.
Next quarterback on the list, Bear Bachmeier. And, Josh, you talked about it. Stats, obviously, superior to what Devin Dampier produced. Mitch, give us a sense of what Bear Bachmeier accomplished as a true freshman, and obviously now looking ahead to what should be a fairly phenomenal sophomore year.
Yeah, Big 12 offensive freshman of the year, and he arrives in June, and he was excellent. I'm curious, you said you had Dampier higher.
Mm-hmm.
I'll admit I had Bear higher. Jake, did you have Bear higher?
I am pulling it right now. I had Bear 2 spots in front of Devin.
Okay. I just think it was a close call. I mean, I had him right back to back on my ranking.
Yeah.
I think Bear, what was so impressive to me is just he felt very mature. He just didn't seem fazed at all by anything. And I think what was probably the most empowering thing for him was that Aaron Roderick almost gave him just the feeling like you never have to look over your shoulder.
Correct.
I was kind of surprised by that, because if you're going to hand the keys to a friend, and yes, you're going to ride with him, but if it ever bottoms out, you got to make a change. And there was never that feeling of happening. Against Arizona, where they pulled out a big win, he struggled mightily passing the football, but those moments were few and far between. For the most part, he was pretty accurate, and I thought that's what really impressed me the most. I think there were times where I had questions about his arm strength, because BYU relies so heavily on explosive plays. The best BYU offenses under Roderick have always had explosive playmaking ability, but I think what maybe made me feel that he can be a great passer is those games, Iowa State and Texas Tech, the Pop-Tarts Bowl against Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
Those 2 games without L.J. Martin, where he had probably his best passing performances, I thought this guy can get it done through the air, because up until that point, it's a lot of relying on LJ and also Bear's ability to run.
Correct.
But Bear did show that he can win a game with his arm, and that's what he did against Iowa State and in the Pop-Tarts Bowl against Georgia Tech.
All right, we are going to stick down in Provo with number 4 on this list. And when you do something that has not happened in the 10 years that Kalani Sitake has been a head coach, you accomplished something pretty remarkable, and that's Jack Kelly at number 4 here, Mitch. First guy to have double-digit sacks under Kalani Sitake, and I think it kind of showed when they brought him from Weber State. He was everything BYU hoped he could be.
I'm glad that you bring that up, Jake, because first time in the Kalani era, I mean, Josh knows as well as anyone, it's like Sack Lake City. That's why I think every Cougar fan thought was Kalani was going to bring was Sack Lake City. Where are the sacks? It's not happening. It's taking a decade. Finally, Jack Kelly delivered that, and he became, he was an excellent football player. 13.5 tackles for loss, 4th in the Big 12. He even had a touchdown in that opener against Portland State. But I like, too, that Jack Kelly, he emerged as a captain, very quiet guy. I mean, when he arrived on campus from Weber State, I don't think he really ever spoke in front of a mic before, and really kind of found his personality, too, a little bit at BYU. And I think that reflected a little bit in his play. He's always been a high-level performer. That's why Jay Hill wanted him. But I like, too, that last summer at Big 12 Media Day, he's like, I want double-digit sacks.
Yeah.
Like, that was a point of emphasis for him, and I think he needed that because that's, I think, the big reason why he's going to the Combine. I know, BYU's new DC, Kelly Papinga, said in the past, sacks are, what was the word he used, pointless or not that big of a deal. They are. Teams will pay a premium if you can get to the quarterback, and Jack Kelly did that a lot for BYU, and his closing speed, too.
Yeah.
A great athlete, and he's burly, too. He's got huge size. His speed kind of surprises you with how big he is, but he was really good for BYU.
Yeah, Josh, you'll get a kick out of this because I hear from teams that can't sack the quarterback that they're overrated. They're not that big of a deal. But when you're a program like Utah who gets them on the regular, it's like, oh, no, they do have a big impact.
Well, it's funny because, the 2024 season, I think they had only a handful. Like, you can count on one hand.
Yeah.
11.
Okay, 2 hands. Okay.
Yeah.
But it was so different because in years past, it was like 25, 27,
Correct.
30 sacks, and it was a complete difference. And it's like you're trying to massage this rhetoric of like, it doesn't matter because we got in the backfield. It's like, no, it does matter because you're making stops, right?
Yeah.
Like, clearly there's other stats that matter, but yeah, I mean, to have a linebacker like that to be able to get into the backfield, like, to me, Jack Kelly embodies kind of the Bryson Barnes of a team, right? He's just this grit guy. He just doesn't really kind of demand a lot of attention, even though he got a lot of attention, and he just does it. Yeah. And as a linebacker, you kind of have to be a little crazy and just kind of just put your body on the line, and clearly he did that. I mean, opposing teams, he was always going to be the number one guy on the scouting report on the defense just because of how phenomenal of an athlete he was, and you saw that, right? Like from the 2 years that he was at BYU, he just embraced the culture and he just did everything that Jay Hill wanted him to do and turned out to be a phenomenal player.
I remember when he got that left arm injury against West Virginia, and that was paired up with Lasker was dealing with his ankle from the Colorado injury, and I'm thinking, Kelly, I was like, this is probably going to be an extended period of time he misses. He only missed the Arizona game. He somehow came back for the Utah game. He missed the Pop-Tarts Bowl. I think that was kind of just, hey, rest. You've had a great career. Get ready for the NFL. But that guy, I mean, to your point, Josh, gritty. I mean, he got checked that thing and got out there for a rivalry game. He wanted that one. And, I mean, he dealt with that left arm injury for pretty much the rest of the season, but he still performed at a high level. Speaks to his investment, the buy-in into the program, and then it showed up with him being one of the top players on the defense.
Yeah, he was a BMX rider growing up. You can kind of see that in the way he played the game. There was no excuses. He just went out there and played ball. All right, we are down to the final 3, gentlemen. So coming up next, we reveal who the top 3 players in the state of Utah from the 2025 football season.
It's funny because we've all been in this long enough, and I swear the defensive linemen may be the nicest, soft-spoken people I've ever met in my life, and yet they'll destroy you on the field. And that's kind of how John Henry Daly was. Like, he just was a monster on the field where he just turned into this sack machine. He just was this phenomenal athlete for Utah, and then unfortunately, it hasn't been reported officially, but we all believe it's an Achilles.
Yeah.
And just devastating blow for him. And now he has to try to do that at Michigan. personally, I don't know that he's going to play this year. Michigan's being very optimistic.
And he's claiming that he's going to be ready by spring
There's
ball.
no way.
I was just like, that seems very ambitious, young man.
Like, I'm sure like he feels good.
Yeah,
but
sure.
to be able to have that jab step and to be able to do these different things, like I just don't see it, which is really unfortunate because as a missionary, you're obviously going to be a little bit more delayed. I think if he had one more full season of what he did this year, he's easily an NFL player.
Yeah.
But I think now he's trying to push that timeline and trying to get there. And I just don't, unfortunately for him, I just don't think it's going to happen, at least this year, the way that he's hoping. But there's no doubt this was a guy that completely changed the tone for Utah because they were losing their star, defensive ends who still weren't kind of the level of what we talked about Sac Lake City in the past, but they were still these veteran guys that were effective. And then suddenly Utah was going to come in with a little bit more youth and trying to find some guys that were less proven. And John Henry Daly absolutely added consistency. He was a threat in the backfield. He made quarterbacks have nightmares because of what he was able to do. And was just this efficient player for Utah, and it's just unfortunate that he didn't get to finish the way that he needed to because of an non-contact injury.
Jake, I'm glad that you brought up his time in high school because John Henry Daly, I thought when BYU got him, that was a massive get, and losing him was a huge deal because I remember out of high school he had 22.5 sacks this season.
He set the single season high school record for the state of Utah.
Unreal. So if he gets healthy, he'll have an impact for Michigan, and I always like too when you dive into the numbers how. He had 11.5 sacks, second in the Big 12, but 8.5 of those sacks were against P4 competition. Sometimes you can get inflated numbers in one game against an FCS team.
5 against an FCS team. Yeah.
He was steady across the board, and if he can recover from that Achilles injury, that lower leg that he suffered against Kansas State, that would be great. He's big time. He'll have an impact in the Big Ten. He's honestly just drew a blank. Detroit Lions, Michigan edge rusher.
Aiden Hutchinson.
Yeah, he's Aiden Hutchinson.
Yes,
that's what he is.
100%.
Yeah, and that's what he'll be if he can get healthy.
Yep, absolutely. All right, number 2 on the list, the final BYU Cougar, the reigning offensive player of the year in the Big 12. This is a pretty easy one, I think, for most people to consider. LJ Martin, 1,300 yards, and he was, I use the term heart and soul of Devin Dampier for Utah. Mitch, I felt like he was the heart and soul of this BYU team.
No question. LJ Martin, BYU went as far as he was going to take him, and he took him to Arlington. And that game against Cincinnati where he's dealing with a shoulder injury, he was banged up in that last month of the season. He goes for 222, and that ultimately clinched the Big 12 championship game appearance because no matter what happened in that regular season finale, they were in Arlington, so he got it done for them, winning that big game in Cincinnati. But LJ, 3 straight years of leading BYU in rushing yards, and it's kind of been a slow build, brick by brick, with the ground attack for BYU in the Big 12 era, where they were maybe the nation's worst rushing offense in 2023, and it's been a slow climb. And now they're one of the best in the league and in the country, led by LJ Martin. I think, man, he's 9th all-time in career rushing yards at BYU. This could be one of the all-timers in BYU running back history, up there with Jamal Williams, Tyler Algier, Jamal Willis. You can go on and on, Luke Staley, LJ Martin. Not many guys, I don't think ever, have had 4 straight years of being the leading rusher at BYU, and that's what's in front of LJ in 2026.
So, Josh, you'll get a kick out of this. So he ran for 1,305 yards this past season. He's 9th all-time on BYU's list right now. If he garners 1,347 yards, so this replicates what he did this past year, he will be the all-time leading rusher in BYU football history. And that's what's out there for him. And I think based on what we saw this past year, it looks certainly attainable that he could lead BYU as the most decorated running back in program history.
Well, what I love about him is that he continues to take a step up every single year. Yeah. And the fact that he was able to do this last year with essentially no depth behind him, like Bear was your next best option, right?
Yeah.
And so the fact that he could do that in a position that just is grueling kind of shows the work ethic that he has, right? Like there's no doubt that he's talented. Clearly he, put up 1,300 yards, like you said.
Yeah.
But the fact that he could continue to do it, knowing that he's going to be literally the only scouted player on offense in terms of the run game, and he still found ways to do it. Sure, Bear added some value there in terms of being able to be another guy that they could utilize, but LJ just took it to another level, and I think that really shows kind of the level of player that he can be.
Yeah.
Now, can you sustain that through another season that way with no depth again? I don't know. But I don't know that that's his fault, right? Like, he's doing his job, and he's being phenomenal with it. and there's no reason not to have him as a number 2 player.
I have real questions about, can he stay healthy? Because each and every season, it's been various injuries for LJ, and that's it's rolling the dice a little bit in 2026 where you don't have anything proven. I thought it would have been a perfect deal for BYU to go into the portal and maybe overpay to say, hey, you're going to be the number 2, but you're going to get paid handsomely, but you're also going to have this nice pairing with LJ. I'm surprised that BYU didn't do that because they've had a lot of success in the portal. Think of Tyson Williams, Chris Brooks. Yeah. They've been a place that's gotten good portal running backs, but they felt like they're going to develop from within. We'll see, just because, again, each and every season, LJ has had injuries. Now, he played every game except the bowl against Georgia Tech this season, but still, I always think he goes out in the first quarter. Texas Tech, he even admitted he was not confident in that shoulder, and that was a huge game. If BYU had a healthy LJ in that game in Lubbock, I don't think it would have been different too much, but like maybe he gives you he can extend drives a little bit more. They need him healthy. He's got to stay healthy because one rolled ankle, it's a completely different outlook for BYU in 2026.
There's a staff member at BYU that told me that if LJ hadn't been what he meant to BYU this year, they likely would have had him have season-ending surgery after the Iowa State game. But they knew how important he was to that offense, and he just essentially taped it up and said, let's get after it. All right, and that brings us to our final selection here, and I think this one was I think everybody could have almost guessed this coming into today, but Spencer Fano, obviously a stud. He's going to be a very, very handsomely paid offensive tackle in the NFL. And Josh, what an incredible player for 3 years at Utah and just finished his career the right way with the Outland Trophy.
Yeah, this is a guy that came in, we talked to him at Big 12 Media Days, and he knew what was on the table, right? Yeah. He knew that he was a first-round pick based on what the projection said. He talked about it, which you don't get that a lot from players, right? Like, they're like, oh, well, I'll just worry about this season.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Like, Spencer, he embraced it, right? Like, and he used that as not even necessarily as motivation. It was more just like, now what I have to do on the field is live up to those expectations. Yes. And he did. Like, there was nothing about his game that was bad. I mean, I'm sure you could pick it apart and do that. I'm not the guy to be that way. But I think when you look at him, he was just everything that Utah needed him to be. He didn't allow many pressures. He didn't allow any sacks. He was pancaking guys left and right. He was doing things that opened up tremendous holes for Devin Dampier and Bird Ficklin and all these other players to get through, and did it in a way that was just kind of like this humble, like, I'm going to go watch anime after this because I'm having fun, right? Like, that's who he is. Yeah. He goes to Disneyland, and he's like this gentle giant type guy, and it was just kind of like this remarkable thing, and now he's going to potentially end up as a top 10 pick in this year's NFL draft.
He's absolutely incredible. And Mitch, you saw him in high school. I saw him in high school. Considering he went from playing for Timpview and being a stud there to being a day one starter over 3 years for Utah, what an incredible just trajectory he's on.
No question. I mean, elite athlete, too, I think, at the tackle spot. And I think also, too, much better defensive lines he faced in the Big 12 this year compared to 2024. I thought there was a big step up in competition, most notably Texas Tech, but even that game, he doesn't give up a sack. I mean, he's going up against David Bailey. I mean, some of the best
Romello Height,
some of the best edge rushers in college football. And, he had a lot of success even trying to hold off those guys. But so I think that the level of competition, the Big 12 and the defensive line stacked, leveled up, and he was still elite. I mean, to Josh's point about embracing the expectations, I remember at media days where Kyle Whittingham saying this is the best offensive line ever. I mean, he's put it out there, and they lived up to it. And Spencer Fano was the key piece to all of it. And, I mean, Josh, is he the best offensive tackle in Utah football history? Is it Gross? Is it Fano? I mean, I think it's him or Gross probably.
I would have to say with Spencer right now, but it's easy to say that in immediacy, right? Yeah. I think Jordan Gross was such a dynamic and dominant player for Utah. We'll see, right? I think a lot of people can see Jordan and what he did in the NFL too and kind of combine that. Yeah. So we'll see what Spencer does, but there's no doubt that this is a guy that was just coming into the season, he was going to be a number one guy. Yes. And he lived up to it.
Well, he embraced everything about it, too.
Exactly, and that's awesome.
Because a lot of guys don't want to do that. They want to just, I'm going to focus on me. No, he said, I get what's going on here.
Absolutely.
And the final thing I want to say, how cool was it to watch his brother announce that he won the Outland Trophy, have the whole family there? That was a really, really cool moment.
Oh, it's like they're just a true family that they embody everything together.
Yeah.
It was cool that they got to do that together, and I think it's a cool opportunity for Spencer now, and we'll get to see what happens in April.
Yeah, we'll give a shout out to Logan, obviously his brother, who's off to the NFL with him. All right, time now to wrap things up with the man, the myth, the legend, Kenny himself from Kenny J's Barbecue. Kenny, it's been awesome to be down here. Honestly, first thing, thank you for having us down here for this re-rank show.
Yeah. Appreciate you guys coming down. Clay hit me up on this for this show a long time ago. Well, not a long time ago, early this year though.
Yeah.
And I was like, hell, I don't like the start of the year business just like dropped. And this is our first year, so I didn't know that that's what it was going to do. And I was like, I don't know if I can afford to bring anybody out. But anyway, we're glad you guys came out and hung out with us. Kind of a little mad at Scotty for taking off to.
He got to go to lovely Reno, as he says. So,
is it that bad?
I was just making fun of him because here's the thing about Reno. I didn't know this until a few years ago. They have the Pro Bowling Hall of Fame out there.
And Kyle Van Noy.
McQueen High School,
Van
man.
Noy was from.
Exactly.
Go, come on, Scotty.
So, Kenny, you've mentioned the bird ends. Those are special on Fridays and Saturdays. I've had your turkey before. I've had the brisket. I've had it all. I just want to ask you, what's the personal favorite? If Kenny's going to go back in the kitchen, what are you making?
So I kind of just throw stuff together. But so if I'm going to do like what customers do, I'll probably turkey ribs.
Okay.
Every once in a while brisket.
Okay.
But that might be because it's so costly for me to produce.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just do like weird stuff. I'll make like weird nacho plates and just
You're
baked potatoes,
experimenting.
stuff like that. Yeah. Just for myself, I'll just anyway.
I love it. So if you want to come down here, it's in the district. You can't miss it. If you know where the movie theater's at, literally just across the street. It's a phenomenal location. The best part about it is everything is made here, and it is authentic to the absolute bone.
Yeah, the only thing that we don't do is the cornbread.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Wow.
Because we're gluten free.
Okay.
On everything except two of our sides, macaroni and cheese and funeral potatoes. And we have a bunch of friends that are celiac. And so all of these recipes and all of this was tested by them and gave us their blessing. And so I won't do cornbread because I don't want gluten flying everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the reason why I buy cornbread, because customers said they want it.
Okay.
So I'm not going to make it.
So but
yeah.
So people can stop by any time. Give them the hours one more time if they want to stop by.
Monday through Thursday, 11 to 8, and then Friday and Saturday, 11 to 9.
Okay. Well, thank you once again for having us out here. It's been absolutely awesome. We love coming out here. Your food's phenomenal. It's good to see people stop by. We've had a couple of listeners stop by as well. So thank you for having us, and obviously here's many, many more hanging out with you.